Hi, welcome back to Talking Insights. I'm your host, Antonio, and in today's episode, we're diving into the future of market research and what it really means to work alongside AI. My guests are Adam Riley, founder of Decision Architecture, and David Smith. He's the director of Davy L. Smith and professor at the University of Hertfordshire Business School. Together, they co-authored the recent Research World article, Learning to Love Your Inner Cyborg, and a book, The Art of Collaborating with AI. We'll talk about embracing our inner cyborg, what it looks in practice, how cultural and leadership play a role in this transformation, and what skills the next generation of researchers will need to thrive. Plus, it's always very interesting to hear Adam and David's stories and how their career journeys shaped their perspectives on this topic. So let's get started. Without further ado, here's David and Adam. All right. Welcome, David and Adam. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise with our listeners, but also our readers in the research world, because you've written a wonderful article that we shared like a couple of days ago. And I want to start with the phrase that you kind of used in the title, like the inner cyborg, and what it means to you, and how it can kind of relate with the collective intelligence idea that you describe in the article.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing we have to say is it's not our centaurs and cyborgs is not our phrase. So it's in a paper called Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier, and they sort of put forward these two models. One is the centaur model where there is delineation. So some things are done by AI, some things are done by a human, and you can sort of see the distinction between man and horse, as it were, where the cyborg model is much more integrated. And so that then kind of leads us to this idea of collective intelligence. So the interactions and the processing is intertwined on a much more sort of visceral level. And that's where the idea of cyborgs comes from. So we can't really take credit for that.
I think that the way that Adam and I are looking at it is to um, take a view on what AI is going to be good at and probably better than us at, and then trying to cast forward to that percentage of what we do where we're going to have that kind of human advantage. So we landed around the idea of um, the modern day insight professional being almost like a modern day polymath or Renaissance person that can understand the context, deal with the nuance, add that creativity, be the storyteller. So my advice to people coming into the industry would be to hang on to all those things I've just mentioned as being at the core of what the profession industry will be like going forward. And then you move on from there to think, well, for any particular activity or task, how do we work alongside AI to deliver that particular thing, telling powerful, compelling insight stories? A lot of it is coming from our own original voice as human beings, but there are tools around that can help us around that. So that really is, I think, where we're coming from. And you could argue that this is nothing new, that really the leading insight professionals for the last 50 years have always had these skills around being able to see the bigger context, have some vision, structure arguments, organize data in a sensible way and explain it to other people. So that's always been there. So I think what we're saying, it's returning to those fundamental principles and skills, but now recognizing that you've got a very powerful tool, an ally in AI to help you. And then we can also throw in the fact, the sort of co-intelligence element, which Adam might want to pick on, where we're doing everything I've said, but working in creative teams.
I think it's what I think is interesting is how organizations will sort of forensically unpick roles. So there are things that we all do that can be done better, faster, cheaper by artificial intelligence. It's about being able to kind of understand what those particular threads are. And then there's then a number of skills or tasks which are innately kind of human that we can then add to that. So we don't buy into this idea that if we look across the insight industry, there is a school of thought which says actually humans are friction in this process. We don't need them. We can automate this. We can from data collection through to dashboard can all be automated. We don't buy into that. And so we think, but there will be, in terms of this notion of collective intelligence, we are going to be looking at what are the elements of people's roles that are best given to artificial intelligence, and then what the counter to that is what human skills do we then need to dial up to make the most of that. And I think from a leader's point of view, that's the question they should be asking, which is how do I deploy artificial intelligence in a way that is much more sort of systematic rather than just let's give someone this tool or that app, or we'll allow you to have access to chat GPT and you can ask it questions. So that's all fine, but that's collective intelligence is.
Do you feel like the company or some companies nowadays, especially in this industry, asking or either are too afraid or are asking too much of their employees to work with AI, but they don't really give them the correct training, or there's not like a training culture in the companies to improve that?
Yes, there's a recent study by MIT that suggested that I think it said that sort of 90% of organizations that had rolled out some kind of artificial intelligence had not seen value in that. And that is probably because they're just rolling out a tool or giving you access to an LLM. They are not looking at it systemically. They are not deconstructing their systems and processes and then kind of rebuilding them from the ground up, thinking, okay, here are the human threads, here are the artificial intelligence threads. I think unless you give people, unless there is a vision from the top, I think people are going to just deploy it in bits and pieces. We're going to use a tool here, we're going to use a tool there, we'll use this app, whatever. I just don't think you will necessarily, it's great, but I don't think you'll necessarily realize big benefits and big value kind of doing it that way. There's value in it, sure, but I think you're missing a trick.
I think that's always been the threat for market researchers and customer insight professionals, that fundamentally what we do, because it's a thinking process and a kind of messy process, is that there's always people at our doors saying, oh dear, all this is getting very complicated and expensive. Can't we just find ways of cutting through this? And some of the time, the answer is yes, we can. And there have been fantastic steps forward where you're using technology and automation. A little part of what we do that is just not so easy to do that. And I think at the minute, the big pressure, like the Adam and I call it, the barbarians of the gate are trying to sell us the idea that we can do insight now to 80% the level that it was done before and do it at the drop of a hat for no money, and encouraging us to buy into that model and say, well, that's okay then. And Adam and ours view is that it is definitely not okay, and it is worth investing in that last expertise on particular problems. So it's always been there, this sort of tension between, saving money, making it faster, and retaining the essence of something that is, outstanding and creative and different. It's just that it's all writ larger now with everything that's happening so rapidly, with AI.
It's interesting you're mentioning creativity, because I want to ask, is it possible to still be creative when working with AI?
Yeah, look, I think the thing I've learned most since that day when I think I first went on to Chat GPT an hour after it was announced that it existed, and that was this kind of epiphany where I thought, wow, this is good. I know there's going to be lots of people down the road saying, I used it for that and it didn't work. There'll be all that usual stuff that happens with technology where people are saying, oh, no, that didn't work and whatever. But fundamentally, the idea of being able to access lots of information that's organized for you to be able to call up different mental models. As a kind of consultant, I thought, wow, this is just actually a phenomenal game changer. Then over the next year or so, Adam and I looked over our book, collaborated with AI. We started writing a book on that. And that's where back to your question, we started learning about how you can work with it. So it's not about the lazy route was I used to do thinking, I can't be bothered with that now. Can I just ask you to do it for me, press button, answer? It's somewhere more around, here's an initial idea, and you learn about different ways to prompt and probe and whatever, and different iterations to come up with something that is a kind of collaborative effort. So I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think it depends on your definition of creativity. So, David, you just mentioned prompting there. Well, I think good prompting is partly a kind of creative art. You've got to ask it the right question. And I think we talk about polymathy and polymathic approaches to kind of working with AI. And creativity is one of the fundamental pillars. So you've got curiosity, interdisciplinary thinking, and creativity. And so, yeah, absolutely, there's a place for it. Yeah. Are we talking about creativity in terms of sketching something out? Well, I'm sure you can go and use DALL-E or whatever, and that's absolutely fine. But creativity is a much kind of broader church, and I think there's definitely a role for a kind of the human strand of broad-based creativity to working with AI. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree. I keep saying, like, we've done a bunch of these episodes related with AI, and I keep saying that it's a tool. You need to learn how to use it properly and how to use it in the best way. I feel like in some other episodes and talking with some people in the industry, sometimes there's always the talk about like, oh, we're gonna lose jobs, we're gonna like AI is gonna take over, it's gonna like replace this and this and this. But I also get a sense that it's also gonna create some more different jobs that we don't even know, right? Like some things that are not even a part of the team budgets at the moment. How do you see that?
Well, go. Sorry, David. Go on.
Kind of conceptualization that Adam and I had was the idea that we will be creating what we're calling the kind of newly advantaged, but also the newly disadvantaged. So the newly advantaged are people who, because don't lose any friends in the educational sector here, but because as a massive generalization, the educational sector is a little bit kind of rigid and it can kind of stifle a lot of creativity. So there's people that would have thought education was a straitjacket, and now with AI to do a lot of the heavy lifting for them in areas they weren't so good at, they're liberated and can think, right, I can bring stuff to the party. So there's a training role there, isn't there, to encourage that and foster that. So that's kind of a positive. But the slight worry is those that are in the newly disadvantaged group. They are people the opposite of that. They've followed all the traditional educational and training routes, and they've got a sort of safe bit of management job. And all of a sudden, there's things that have come along to challenge that. And they will need to go into some serious, not just upskilling those skills, it may, some fundamental rethink about what skill set they have. And, I don't think government have really got their head round the enormity of that. I think Sam Altman was saying that a month ago, that the sheer enormity of that re-skilling operation is massive and no one's really got their head around it. So we're not kind of mystics here. We don't know exactly how that will pan out, but that's the space to watch, how we manage as a society the nurturing of the newly advantaged, but also support what we could call the newly disadvantaged.
I think lots of knowledge industries, which Insight is one, will need less people. So, I think, again, it comes back to this elements of your role that artificial intelligence can do better, faster, cheaper. And what organization is going to turn their nose up at the opportunity to reduce costs? It would be naive to think that they wouldn't do that. So some people will not have a job. I mean, some people will lose their job. And I think the question is, can you kind of step up and start learning a new set of skills, or honing or improving the skills you've got? And we talk about these in terms of 7 power skills, but it's critical thinking, it's sense making, it's forward thinking, it's communication, it's leadership. Those sorts of skills on the human side of the equation, you need to be able to dial up. And if you can't dial them up, then you're going to be at risk. And that, I think, is the sort of the more unpalatable part of this, but I think it is inevitable.
And it's not just
all individuals can do, isn't it? We identify those skills where we as an individual can add some value alongside AI, because we can't take on the world. We just hope that basically AI magically manages to float all boats, that it just drives growth and productivity. And we look back in 10 years' time and say, what were we worried about? We've actually got all of that growth, actually creating just another world that we can't really imagine now. Now, there are people around that are nervous about that. Hinton, who's one of the godfathers of AI, hopes that will be the case, but he's giving us strong messages that we can't take that for granted, that growth will naturally create this world where everyone's in employment. So we can't take our eye off that particular ball. But for the individual in all of this, it's really back to what Adam's saying, that that's what we can do, and we just hope that that we do get that growth. That creates another kind of world with a whole range of jobs that we haven't thought of yet.
And there seems to be an assumption you're looking at previous technological revolutions, and that have, in the end, I mean, there's a lot of dislocation and there's a lot of pain, but in the end, have created more jobs than have been destroyed. But you're sort of assuming that historic precedent is going to continue to hold. And I just wonder to what extent AI is such a fundamental shift in terms of what it could do within the world of knowledge work, whether that's going to hold true. I don't know, and no, nor does anyone else. But a lot of people are kind of hanging their hat on that, and I think it's more in hope than sort of necessary reality.
Yeah, I agree, because at the end of the day, like, these shifts or these new technology happen all the time. Like, when there was no internet, when the internet came, everyone was like, whoa. And now it's something that you have to use every day. The same thing with, there's a bunch of cultural and technological advances that I feel like when they get to a point where everyone's kind of want to work with them, everyone's kind of scary, but then they learn how to use it and evolution works with it. Speaking of it, was there like a pivotal moment, or was there a moment for you too that make you look at AI in a different light, or that you went and looked like, wait, this is not just a shiny thing?
I tell you what I did. I thought, go on. So this wasn't the first thing I asked it on day one when I first got my head around. I maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, I said, well, what would be quite a challenging management consultancy task that Adam and I could be take on? And I said, well, imagine the government phoned up and said, well, guys, we want to make sure that everyone in the UK realizes we're going to change driving from the one side of the road to the other. So that's the plan. By next week, we want a full management consultancy piece on how we manage the whole idea that the UK is now going to drive on the other side of the road. So being that sort of teasing the platforms, I went in and said, hey guys, I've got no time. Can you just help me with this? So cut a long story short, bingo, within 8 seconds or something, we've got a 35-page outline of all the issues that you need to cover, vehicle modification, public edge, blah, 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 blah. And then back to your point about being creative, there's little kind of bits and pieces about this that I knew about that could throw it. So I went back in and said, I won't bore you with them now, but I said, what happens in this situation where we're trying to sort out this issue? And it came back saying, oh, yeah, let me cover that off. So I thought that was quite good. I thought, wow, that would be when I was, running a bigger company, that might be 1 year's work for 25 Oxbridge graduates, all done, bingo. So I thought, wow, that was quite an eye opener. Now people could never wear that and say, well, excuse me, it didn't cover off that point or that point. But the point is, for like no money in hardly any time, you have a whole massively complicated problem structured and organized. So I thought that was that was my little moment where I thought, well, we've got to take this seriously.
I think we've been on a bit of a journey with this, right? So we started in early 22 writing a piece for ESMAR Congress on future scenarios for the insight industry, and a big part of that was what we referred to as machine learning. That's before we really knew what a large language model was. And then kind of at the end of 22, you had the launch of ChatGPT-3 and it took off. So we're starting to connect different dots. And then we come across the writings of Thomas Malone, who's talked about superminds and human AI interaction. So there's another dot to connect. And then we kind of read about there's Risco and Gilbert, I think it is, wrote about cognitive offloading. Clark and Chalmers wrote about extended minds, and so you're constantly connecting all of these dots. And I think we've now got to this point where we're writing about kind of collective intelligence, and there's you can kind of trace this journey back, and it's been sort of it's really interesting to kind of fold in another or look at it through another lens and just see how it's evolving. But yeah, I mean, the first time you play with a large language model, you just think, wow.
Yeah.
And you can see, I forget his name, but the guy at Google who they unfortunately fired because he was so convinced this thing was sentient because it was so good, and the cognitive processing was so human like that he was convinced this, maybe too much coffee and too many late nights, he was convinced this thing was sentient and made the mistake of coming out and saying so. And so there you have that sort of wow moment when you're sort of playing with it. Yeah, but it's been an interesting kind of what are we now? Kind of almost 4 years playing
I
with
don't
this.
think we're, just sort of completely gung ho and being over the top about AI, because there are kind of other moments. I was playing around with it over the last year around the idea of like creative writing, and that it's been less satisfactory there because I suddenly realised after about 6 months that AI's read too many rubbish books and can come up with some really crass, ropey little additions to what I'm writing. And I thought, no, you know what? I was better off just leaving that alone. Where I've been very enthusiastic around it helping create, business frameworks and models, I'm sort of less enthusiastic about adding that little nuance if you're doing something that is more around the creative writing thing. But it's all part of the learning curve, isn't it? I've learned now how to use it, not by giving it whole chunks of stuff, but saying, I just need a little bit of nuance to help around this paragraph. Oh, just do your bit there, look at it, and maybe a couple of iterations. I've moved it along and it's added 10% to what I've done, but a valuable 10%. Whereas in other areas, it's done a much stronger job.
That's so brilliant. I don't want to take much more time of your day. I feel like I could stay like another hour talking to you about AI. You really explain it well in a non too much techy way. I don't know if this makes sense, but I've been doing a lot of these. I've been talking to a lot of people on AI and synthetic data, and I don't know. There's so many new innovations like in the past year, if so, like, and everyone's really always much more techy, much more hard to understand, and you really made it very understandable for the audience and for me. I want to finish with just one question for you both, which is if you had one advice for everyone listening, from the newcomers to the industry to the CEO, what would that advice be?
Well, I think it would, but really just be reiterating what we're saying, that you need that vision to embrace AI. It's very confusing. If you looked on LinkedIn, you've got different people. There's kind of like the AI deniers. Oh, well, this is never going to go anywhere. And there's people that are saying, I called it out. I asked it to solve this incredibly complicated problem, and it got it wrong. And they're showing off about that. And there's lots of people that are kind of have a view on AI. And my advice would be to get above that and take the view that we do need to work with this. It's not perfect, and put in all those disciplines to work with it creatively. And that's fairly obvious advice in a way, and to sit back and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, I think it's because I think there's a number of people that are still sort of aren't playing with it, aren't using it, are perhaps frightened by it. I would say just dive in, pick one, and go and play with it. And then I think, but that's if you're new to the industry, that's kind of my advice is go play with AI. But you need to think about the other skills you need to develop. And I think if you're a senior leader within industry, I think the advice is strategic conversation about what it is you want from artificial intelligence. It can do so many things, and what's your vision for your organization or your business vis-a-vis AI moving forward? What does that business look like in 5 years' time? And that's a conversation I think you need to have.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, David, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much
Pleasure.
for the expertise and for your articles, for everything. I think everyone's learning so much, and it's honestly a very interesting world to be discovering. Yeah, I guess we'll have a lot of more conversations about AI for sure in the future because you guys are really experts on it. So thank you so much.